Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're cutting through some of the noise in the tech world. We're looking at everything from, autonomous systems changing defense to those tiny little chips driving global competition and, well, even how AI is quietly popping up in the office.
Yeah, definitely seeing it creep in everywhere.
Our mission, like always, is to take your sources, could be articles, research, maybe just your own notes, and really distill them. Get down to those clear, impactful insights. We're here to help you connect the dots,
Yeah.
across all this cutting-edge tech stuff, giving you that shortcut to being, well, genuinely informed.
And our goal really is to help you see beyond just the headlines. We want to uncover those maybe surprising connections and the bigger picture implications across stories that might seem totally separate. It's about understanding not just what's happening, but critically why it matters and what fundamental shifts are actually underway in, the whole tech landscape.
Okay, so let's start with Applied Intuition. This company is now valued at, a staggering $15 billion?
Yeah, eye-watering number.
Exactly. And when you look at what they're doing, it's clearly, well, it's not just about self-driving cars anymore, is it?
No, not up
They
there.
seem to be leveraging their core intelligence way beyond, your standard robotaxi.
Well, a key takeaway here is what they call their dual-use approach. It's fascinating, actually. They're taking that same advanced intelligence tech that powers passenger vehicles and applying it to a really surprising range of defense applications. We're talking infantry vehicles, tanks, even jets.
Wow, okay.
So this isn't just about, faster cars or fancier military gear. It really points to a future where the core value isn't the physical machine itself,
Right.
but the intelligence that's baked into it. Imagine every physical thing, a drone, a factory robot, whatever, basically becoming a software platform. That's the really profound shift Applied Intuition is tapping into. And it makes their tech valuable and potentially cheaper across loads of different industries.
Okay, but here's something that really caught my eye. In this funding round, the CEO actually said they didn't need the capital from this huge investment.
Yeah, that raised eyebrows.
It did. So what's really going on there? Why raise so much cash if you don't, quote, need it?
Well, if you look at the broader implications, it feels like a very strategic move, kind of rooted in what you might call radical pragmatism.
Yeah.
See, a big chunk of their employee pay is equity, right?
Okay.
So having independent investors come in and put a value on the company, that allows for a much more accurate sort of market-driven equity valuation for their team. And it's also, I think, a smart way of warming up to the kind of discipline and transparency you need to be a public company, building those muscles, basically, before maybe thinking about an IPO down the line.
That makes sense. And then there's that big ongoing debate in self-driving tech. Is it all cameras? Or do you absolutely need the whole suite, cameras, LiDAR, radar, for redundancy, for safety?
It's a sensor debate.
What do you see as the real stakes here? Is it just about the tech, or are we looking at totally different market segments opening up?
Yeah, it really makes you wonder about that market segmentation and, like you said, ultimately the cost. The CEO doesn't seem to see it as binary, like one or the other. Both versions will probably exist, in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
For a regular passenger car, one with the driver still in the loop, fewer sensors, lower cost, that's probably fine. But for those truly driverless robotaxis where there's zero human backup, well, then you absolutely need greater redundancy, more robust software, and that naturally means higher costs. Ultimately, like so many businesses, the car business is a cost business. That's what dictates who the end customer is and which tech really fits what they need and what they'll pay for.
That makes sense. And that shift in mobility, it demands we look closer at the tech powering it all. Semiconductors, chips.
Delegation.
Exactly. And we're seeing things like proposals, maybe in a Trump tax bill draft, looking to boost chip tax credits up from 25% to 30%, trying to incentivize building right here in the U.S.
Yeah, and the real revelation here, I think, is the sheer scale and the strategic importance of these incentives. People talk about the grants, sure, but the real money is in the tax credits. That's what you hear.
Right.
So, for example, if a giant like TSMC actually goes ahead with its plan, $165 billion investment in the U.S. over the next 4 years?
Huge number.
It is. That proposed increase from the Senate, that could mean almost an extra $8 billion in tax breaks for them, bringing their total potential break to like $49 billion.
Wow.
It just highlights the massive global strategic importance of semiconductors. Every country wants domestic capacity now.
So hang on, does committing to build onshore automatically mean, immediate growth or profit for these companies? It sounds like a colossal investment for maybe a very distant payoff.
Yeah, that's the tricky part. From a wider view, investors are always looking ahead, right? These are enormous capital projects that, like we said, can take decades to fully mature. So it's really not about next quarter's revenue or profit. Instead, it's about analyzing how the whole market structure is changing over the next, say, 5 to 20 years.
Okay.
The competition for tech is heating up globally, plus you've got these rising geopolitical tensions. That's what's pushing this whole drive for domestic production, this underlying shift in market structure. That's what will really impact long-term profitability for everyone involved.
So given this intense focus on chips, what's that mean for the wider AI build-out? Is it still just about the big names we know, like NVIDIA? Or are we seeing new players, new opportunities emerging across that supply chain?
Well, it definitely begs the question about where we are in the AI build-out. Are we still in the early innings? Capital spending on infrastructure has certainly shot up, no doubt. But the pace of innovation, it actually seems to be accelerating. Yeah. So we're definitely going to see multiple winners pop up across the entire AI supply chain. It won't just be one or two companies. And what's also interesting is, the last 10, 15 years, innovation was mostly focused on consumer-facing names. A lot of those became the Mag 7, right, this time. The innovation is heavily, heavily concentrated on the underlying tech, the physical infrastructure. That includes things on the industrial side, the energy transition front. We're already seeing profitable growth from some maybe unexpected winners in those spaces.
And this whole push for domestic supply chains, it goes beyond just chips, doesn't it? Especially when you mention critical materials like rare earths. That seems to be a constant source of worry.
Oh, absolutely. The underlying issue there is a massive geopolitical and supply chain vulnerability. It's stark. Countries in the G7 are really struggling to reduce how much they depend on China. China is just dominant in producing rare earths and permanent magnets.
Those are essential.
Essential for critical tech like electric vehicles, wind turbines, lots of defense applications. The West simply cannot produce these things at scale right now. And that creates this persistent anxiety about supply, the strategic imbalance. It's a real headache.
Speaking of domestic production claims,
Yeah.
there was that intriguing announcement from the Trump family, a $499 T1 smartphone. And they're claiming it's designed in the U.S. and built in the U.S.
Right, I saw that.
But some industry folks are, let's say, highly skeptical. What should we make of these kinds of bold statements, given how complex global manufacturing actually is?
Yeah, the core insight there is really the claim versus the, frankly, immense challenge of building a full domestic supply chain for something as complex as a smartphone.
Sounds almost impossible.
It's incredibly difficult. Industry experts are suggesting that T1 phone is actually made by a Chinese company, Wingtech. And you look at someone like the CEO of Purism, that's a company that genuinely does manufacture electronics in the U.S.
Okay, they actually do it.
They do. He stated it took them over a decade just to get to that point. And even then, they still have to source some things, like metal chassis, from China. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, they have pretty strict made in USA rules. They'd likely come knocking on claims of full U.S. production if a product is mostly made overseas.
Right. But that Purism CEO, he also claimed their U.S.-made phones only cost about 10% more to make than doing it in China.
Yeah, that number jumps out.
It does. On the surface, that sounds like a surprisingly small difference, especially when you think about typical labor costs. How is that even possible?
Well, this brings up a fascinating point about manufacturing philosophy, really. China often, the approach is to throw bodies at the problem because labor is cheaper, maybe around $12 an hour, something like that. U.S. manufacturing, on the other hand, tends to throw engineering and innovation at it. Meaning things like hacking firmware, heavily automating testing. Companies like Purism do this to drastically cut down the actual human labor time needed per phone, maybe down to about 30 minutes.
Okay, I see.
So even with higher skilled labor costs in the U.S., say $20 an hour, the net difference in the final cost of goods sold ends up being, surprisingly small. Around 10% more for U.S. electronics manufacturing in their case. Plus, their U.S.-made version can command higher margins because, well, they're basically the only U.S.-made electronics phone. They can target specific markets, like government contracts, that demand secure supply chains.
Fascinating. And it's not just phones, right? The challenge of sourcing materials also hits batteries hard, especially with things like graphite being so critical.
Exactly.
So how is a company like Pure Lithium trying to innovate around that problem.
Well, it's intriguing how pure lithium seems to have found a pretty direct solution to that China dominance over graphite. Graphite is the single biggest component in traditional lithium-ion batteries, right?
Right.
They've invented a totally new battery design. It replaces the graphite anode with pure lithium metal.
Lithium metal.
Yeah. Sourced from brine, which is found abundantly all over the U.S. And they pair that with a vanadium cathode, that's another material available outside China. This lithium metal battery idea, it's actually based on Nobel Prize-winning work from way back in 1977.
Wow.
But they've apparently cracked how to make it work practically now. And it offers a step change in energy density. Plus, it's remarkably cheaper.
Cheaper how?
Like 62% less on a materials cost basis, around $27 per kilowatt hour. And it's substantially cheaper to manufacture because it completely gets rid of these costly formation cycles that standard lithium-ion batteries have to go through during production.
So it's cheaper and made in the U.S. That sounds almost too good to be true for domestic supply chains.
It sounds incredibly promising, yeah.
When can we actually expect to see this technology reach scale? When might it be widely available?
Well, they're still relatively young, a 4-year-old company. They're actively building a prototype pilot facility right now, and they're talking directly with folks in Washington, D.C. The macro trend here is definitely broad support within the administration for building a U.S. domestic battery supply chain. Especially, and this is critical for military applications, the fact that the U.S. currently only has about a 30-day battery stockpile for the military that's described by industry leaders as frightening.
Yikes. Yeah, that sounds bad.
It really underscores the urgency, the strategic importance of this kind of domestic innovation. And showing tangible progress, Pure Lithium even has a letter of interest from the U.S. Export-Import Bank, the Exim Bank, to help fund their first proper production facility. So steps are being taken towards scaling.
Okay, shifting gears one last time. Let's unpack how AI is already changing, maybe the more mundane stuff, the nitty-gritty of business operations, not just cars or chips.
Right, the back office AI.
Yeah. We heard from the CEO of Ramp. They're focused on automating things like expense reports, procurement for businesses. What does this actually mean for the average company drowning in admin work?
Well, the real revelation here, I think, is just how pragmatic their application of AI is. They're using it to solve these universal business headaches. They help companies cut their spending by about 5% a year, which is significant, and they give back valuable time by automating those tedious tasks, expense reports, paying bills, basically putting expenses on autopilot, as they say. They're pretty clear. AI might not replace your CFO anytime soon, but it can absolutely handle that low-value, repetitive work that just eats up so much time and energy. It really makes you wonder how much invisible AI is already making our daily business lives easier, without us even noticing.
Yeah.
Just quietly automating things behind the scenes.
That's a good point. And they mentioned shipping something like 270 new features just in 2025 alone and growing super fast. How on earth do they find the talent to fuel that kind of relentless innovation?
Yeah.
Especially now the tech market is so competitive.
Yeah, it's fierce out there, but putting this in context, it just highlights that even in the most cutting-edge tech, business is still fundamentally about people. Ramp apparently spends over half its payroll just on R&D, and they strategically focus on finding these extraordinary engineers really early in their careers.
How do they spot them?
Well, they look for indicators like winning international Olympiads in science or math. Remarkably, they have 13 medalists on staff, which, as they pointed out, is more than most nation-states.
Wow, okay. That's specific.
It is. And they're leveraging New York City's incredible talent density, as they put it, seeing that concentration of talent as a major advantage in building their team.
So that was quite the journey today, quite the deep dive into tech and gadgets.
It really was.
We went from, self-driving tanks and these multi-billion-dollar valuations all the way through the geopolitical ballet of chip making and rare earths.
Yeah, the strategic stuff.
And then right down into the nitty-gritty of U.S.-made smartphones and even AI automating our expense reports.
Indeed. We've really seen how innovation isn't just about the flashy new product, right? It's also so much about the underlying infrastructure, the strategic weight of supply chains, and just the smart, pragmatic use of AI to solve real problems for businesses, even for national security.
So what does all this mean for you as you try to navigate this just incredibly fast-moving tech landscape? Well, as we keep seeing these rapid advances, here's something to think about. Beyond all the headlines, which invisible AI application, the one quietly working away behind the scenes, which one do you think will have the most profound, yet maybe uncelebrated, impact on our daily lives in the next 5 years? And crucially, what role will these resilient, localized supply chains play in actually making that future possible? Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. If you maybe gained a new perspective or had one of those aha moments, perhaps consider sharing this with someone else who loves staying informed and, cutting through all the noise. We're always here to help you get to the heart of what's truly important.